what is a hot flash? And the question here is a hot flash the same thing to get hot and sweaty, or if it's a surge of heat? So they're both defined as a hot flash. And some people get confused because some people think that a hot flash should be the heat and the sweat. But sometimes that sudden surge of heat is also a hot flash. And a hot flash also always comes where there's a hormone imbalance. And that can happen in male, females, teenagers, young adults, and mature people. There's no distinction. And why is this so important? Is because people think that hot flashes only come for postmenopausal women, but that's not the reality. So when some people come to the clinic and say, oh, look at my blood results, it doesn't mean I'm heading into menopause, and they panic because they think they will get the hot flashes. I want you to realize that menopause is not equivalent to hot flashes because they can come anytime. And hot flashes, like I said to you before, can be on men as well. So menopause simply means that the period stops happening. So the bleeding cycle, the normal cycle with bleeding stops happening. And that is a consequence of having low estrogen, low progesterone, low DHEA, all the hormones keep going down. And hence the body cannot ovulate anymore. And there then is no need to the body to prepare the uterus for that. So that doesn't happen anymore. There's no signaling into that. But how can it be possible then that people relate that menopausal period to hot flashes? Well, it is because in both cases, there's a hormonal imbalance. So when your body stops ovulating and there's no more periods, that means there's not enough hormones. So there's an imbalance of hormones. But the actual flashes occur when the estrogen-progesterone ratio is out of balance. So it's a very specific ratio that needs to be in place. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all the hormones are very low. And this is the main difference with menopause, because menopause means all the hormones are very low. But in the hot flashes situation, doesn't necessarily mean they are all low. It just means that the estrogen-progesterone ratio is out. And for males that they don't have estrogen, they don't have progesterone, it simply means that the estrogens are out of balance in relationship to the testosterone. So estrogen here plays a huge role into preventing hot flashes. And in the case of females, you could have hot flashes for two reasons. In the case of male, from one reason. So in the case of females, you might have hot flashes when the progesterone is too low in relationship to the estrogen, or vice versa. The estrogen is too low in relationship to the progesterone. So it could be either or. In the case of males, it's normally an increase of estrogen, and that can bring hot flashes. So we always talk about having three forms of estrogen. So which estrogen I'm referring to? I'm referring normally at the estrogen 2. That is the fertile estrogen, is the one that increases ovulation and is the one that is mainly responsible for proliferation. In saying that, because we have a total amount of estrogen, if the total amount of estrogen is also high, not just the estrogen 2, that can also interfere with the hot flashes. But the main important thing to consider here is estrogen 2 ratio with progesterone. So how do you know if your hot flash is being an estrogen dependent dominant or a progesterone dominant, or a deficiency, a progesterone deficiency or estrogen deficiency? Well, you need to look at other signs and symptoms. The first, if your cortisol is really high, you mean you're under a lot of stress, you can't fall asleep easily, you get brain fog very often, your cholesterol is increasing, you get quite anxious, that's a sign that your progesterone is very, very, very low. And so it could be very well that your progesterone is so low that your hot flashes are coming from having low progesterone. But if you're having a situation where you are gaining weight, you're craving sweets and chocolates, you're moody, you're sharp, your gut is having issues, your joints are sore, then the chances are is your hot flashes are coming from a estrogen imbalance and low estrogen in relationship to progesterone. So in that case, you need to have clarisage to balance, where in the other example, you need to have progestins to balance you. For the case of males, we normally, for an excess, so we look at excess of estrogen always with saliva tests. For males, it's a little bit tricky to guess what is happening unless you have a proper saliva test. For females, ideally, you want a saliva test, but you cannot more or less by symptoms balance a person, roughly balance a person. Because as you know, hormones need to be very specific. So if you sometimes are not specific, you might not be able to sort out the problem because of a question of 1 or 2 drops difference. And when I say that is most of the times you could see a person, if I give 4 drops of clarisage for estrogen and 6 drops of progestins for progesterone, might start improving. But that's a generalized assumption based on the amount of tests that I do. Not everybody is the same, and not everybody will have the same results. So in generalizing, there's always a risk that I will be completely off the mark, or you will be completely off the mark, because you could be that person that your situation is completely different. And hence why I normally see, okay, what are your symptoms? What are your signs? Do we have any saliva test or not? And depending on that, I prescribe the amount of drops. Now, for males, as I was talking, I normally do a saliva test. And if the estrogen is high, I work with Juva Cleanse or Juva Tone. So Juva Tone, the capsule is better. And because it works on the liver for a specific pathway of breaking down hormones. Now, it's very well known out there that we can use broccoli powder. And a lot of practitioners are using that to break down excessive amounts of estrogen. The key is when you break down a particular estrogen, you will break down the 3 forms of estrogen, and you might deplete an estrogen that is already low. And so that's why measurement is important, to understand what the levels are. Also, working with the broccoli powder, it can, people normally don't realize that the body balances quite quickly. And so people tend to do it for a prolonged period of time. And in doing that, it will definitely wipe out the estrogens, and that can also bring problems. So what is the solution? If we look at signs and symptoms, low estrogen in a female will bring a lot of headaches, migraine. So if a person's got migraines, there's a chance that the estrogen is low. If a person has got, like I said before, sore joints, stiffness, gut imbalances, weight gain, cravings, moodiness, depression, tendency for depression, the chances are that the estrogen is much lower than the progesterone. So lower estrogen than progesterone. And then you can play with the number of drops until you get it right, or you can do a test. A lot of people are not happy to pay for testing, and then there's a risk, because there's a risk that the number of drops we're placing might not be enough. So do we need anything else to balance hot flashes and mood and PMS and all those symptoms? Yes, vitamin B6, vitamin B complex in general is very important, but B6 in particular is very important. And also magnesium levels are important. And when the estrogen start dropping, we must address calcium levels, because otherwise collagen as well, because the bones will start getting brittle. And that's a real problem, because that's when osteoporosis sets in, low estrogen. When estrogen is low, there's a high possibility that testosterone is low. Normally they come hand in hand due to the pathway they follow in the body. And testosterone also supports bone health. So when we talk about thyroid health is part of a triangle that we talk about: adrenals, thyroid, and hormones. But what happens is when the nervous system is overwhelmed, it signals the adrenal gland and the thyroid gland to help. And so if the thyroid gland start going down, if the adrenal gland start going down, the thyroid gland will definitely go down. And here comes a little triangle with the progesterone. So low adrenals, low thyroid, low progesterone. And those three normally come hand in hand. So you can't support adrenal thyroid without supporting adrenals. And you won't support progesterone without supporting thyroid and adrenals. So what are the best thyroid support? Young Living has got a capsule called Thyromin that is very specific with tissue, thyroid tissue, that supports the gland formation. And we got also